Fallout 3 doesn't just deliver a very gritty and dark portrayal of human society, but also a dark and gritty post-apocalyptic society, meaning the depravity and decadence is naturally cranked way up. The survivors of the Great War, which ended in nuclear destruction of most of the world, are forced to live in terrible conditions and have little to hold on to when it comes to hope for things improving. The environment is virtually a petri dish for sin and corruption. Crime is rampant and dangers lurk around every corner. Like modern society, drugs and other vices are a way for survivors to deal with these pressures. Whilst frowned against by the general populace, drug use is very common, especially amongst the less rule-abiding citizens. The world of Fallout 3 features many different types of drugs, or as they are known in-game, chems, short for chemicals. The one we'll be focusing on in this video is Med-X, and how the inclusion of the drug originally caused the game to be banned in Australia and then censored worldwide. Med-X is a potent painkiller administered via a syringe, and when consumed by the player, it reduces damage by 25%. The drug is based on the real-life drug morphine, which is an opiate-based painkiller and is highly addictive and illegal unless given by healthcare professionals. Med-X isn't just based on morphine though, but was originally called morphine, and it is this that prompted the Australian ban. The Fallout games have always featured various chems that provided the player with a wide range of effects. However, this was the first time for one to be named after an illegal real-life drug. Furthermore, Australia has a long history of video game censorship, and whilst things have got a lot less strict in recent years, a big source of problems in Australia has always been drug use related to what they call incentives and rewards. And this specific type of content is something that continues to be an issue today. The website Refused Classification, a specialised resource focusing on Australian censorship, has a detailed write-up of the different twists and turns that the Fallout 3 decision took. As usual, this video will be focusing on the facts to help you learn exactly what happened and what the issue was. The story begins in July 2008, 3 months before the game was scheduled to be released. It was then that the Australian Classification Board refused the title, citing that it promoted or encouraged prescribed drug use. A title being refused classification in Australia means that it is illegal to sell within the country. It's not illegal to own them for personal use in most of the country, but it is in Western Australia and a few other regions where things are stricter. Fallout 3 was one of the biggest and most anticipated games of the year, and so this decision was naturally met with huge controversy. Refused Classification has a copy of the Classification Board's Fallout 3 report, which details the game's content and why it was refused classification. The report explains, in the board's majority view, the game warrants an RC classification in accordance with Item 1A of the Computer Games Table of the National Classification Code. This referring to this paragraph in the classification code, which states, computer games that depict, express or otherwise deal with matters of sex, drug misuse or addiction, crime, cruelty, violence or revolting or abhorrent phenomena in such a way that they offend against the standards of morality, decency and propriety generally accepted by reasonable adults to the extent that they should not be classified will be refused classification. The guidelines for the classification of films and computer games also state that, as a general rule, material that contains drug use and sexual violence related to incentives and rewards is refused classification. This part of the classification code forces any game that depicts this content to be refused classification. The report then explains that it was determined that Fallout 3's content met the prior description and thus must be refused classification. To quote, the game contains the option to take a variety of drugs known as chems using a device which is connected to the character's arm. Upon selection of the device, a menu select screen is displayed. Upon this screen is a list of chems that the player's character can take. These chems have positive effects and some negative effects. Lowering of intelligence, or the character may become addicted to the chem. The positive effects include increase in strength, stamina, resistance to damage, agility and hit points. Corresponding with the list of various chems are small visual representations of the drugs. These include syringes, tablets, pill bottles, a crack type pipe and blister packs. In the board's view, these realistic visual representations of drugs and their delivery method brings these science fiction drugs in line with real-world drugs. The guidelines also states that material promoting or encouraging prescribed drug use is refused classification. The player can also select and use morphine, a prescribed drug, which has the positive effect of enabling the character to ignore limb pain when the character's extremities are targeted by the enemy. The authorized assessor's report also states that chems are an essential part of Fallout 3, and the player will likely use a variety of them throughout the game. In the board's view, the drug use in particular and the use of the prescribed drug via means of selection from from a menu is related to incentives and rewards, as the incentive to take the drug is to progress through the game more easily, and the reward is an increase in the character's abilities, and as such is refused classification. A month later, in August 2008, the game was then resubmitted to the classification board, and it earned what was for the time the highest rating possible, a 15+ restricted rating with the consumer advice, strong violence, drug references, and coarse language. This release of the game had been modified to rename the drug to Med-X, and this was enough to satisfy the Australian rating system. The new classification report explained, the drug references within the revised version are justified by context and lend a strong playing impact to the game. The drugs depicted are fictional. Drugs are depicted as stylized icons on a menu, with the drug use itself not depicted. Whilst navigating a post-apocalyptic futuristic landscape, players can invoke the use of a variety of chems listed by fictitious names, which include Buff, Rad-X, Psycho, and Ultrajet. Within the context of the game's narrative, the player may choose to make use of these chems to alter the physiological characteristics of their character in the game. The board noted that the guidelines for the classification of films and computer games 2005 states that, as a general rule, material that contains drug use related to incentives or rewards is refused classification, and found that relationship between drug use and the incentives and rewards is not such that it promotes or encourages the use of prescribed drugs. Therefore, the game does not warrant to be refused classification and can be accommodated at MA 15+ with a consumer advisory of strong drug references. However, as is now common knowledge, things didn't end there. Right before the game's release, Bethesda decided to make the same change as the Australian version worldwide. Project manager Pete Hines explains, "We want to make sure folks understand that the Australian version of Fallout 3 is identical to both the UK and North American versions in every way, on every platform. An issue was raised concerning references to real-world prescribed drugs in the game, and we subsequently removed those references and replaced them with fictional names. To avoid confusion among people in different territories, we decided to make those substitutions in all versions of the game in all territories." And thus, with this, not just Fallout 3, but all Fallout games that have followed this so far, being Fallout New Vegas and Fallout 4, have all renamed morphine to Med-X. However, the debate doesn't end there, as only a few months following Fallout 3 being refused a rating for morphine use, another game featuring morphine was allowed a release with no issues. The game was Velvet Assassin, a World War II stealth title inspired by a real-life secret agent. Here, the player could pick up morphine, which is explicitly called morphine, and then use it to give them a bullet time-like special effect, which slows down time to either allow the protagonist to kill enemies or run away. The fact that a real-life drug was being used as a power-up and yet passed in Australia was seen as contradictory. However, speaking about the matter, the classification board explained that they felt that there were a few differences in Velvet Assassin's case, which meant it didn't warrant a drug use related to incentives or rewards ban. To quote, "The board notes that the game Velvet Assassin contains drug references that can be accommodated within a lower classification. However, the presence of the drug references warrants the additional consumer advice of drug references for the following reasons. 1. The drug references consist of references to morphine and the presence of syringes that can be collected by players within each mission. The syringes allow the player to have morphine implicitly administered to them a limited number of times. The morphine links back to the reality of Violetta being administered the drug in hospital. Although the use of morphine enables the player to better complete difficult parts of the mission, this does not lead to killings being more violent, to the demise of more enemies, or a better outcome for the player or the character of Violetta. 2. While the general rule in the classification guidelines state that material that contains drug use related to incentives or rewards is refused classification, the board is of the opinion that the incentives in the game are very nuanced and mitigated by the historical and medical context of the references to the drug. The drug references are no higher than moderate in playing impact. They can therefore be accommodated within a lower classification, but warrant the additional consumer advice of drug references. What they say here though is contradictory to what is actually found in the game, as the drug use does allow her to kill more enemies and to get a better outcome. The drugs give her a huge power up that slows time to accrue and will allow her to kill all of the enemies. However, what they also say is that due to 1, its historical setting, and 2, the real life medical use of the drug, whereby morphine will be administered to patients, these factors allow them to see it as less of an issue. These points are very true, as within the game you play a soldier who's currently in a coma in a hospital. The events depicted in the game are flashbacks to the past while she's still in a coma, And when the morphine is used, she'll be shown in her hospital gown, linking back to the fact that she's in hospital in a coma. Furthermore, whilst Velvet Assassins was allowed a release, numerous games following Fallout 3 have also been banned due to drug use related to incentives and rewards. One of the biggest of these was 2013's Saints Row 4, which had a whole mission removed in the Australian version, which saw you get high and then gain superpowers. The latest game banned for this reason was 2016's The Bug Butcher, an action shooter for PC and consoles. Here, the classification board objected to a power-up called Speed Injection, which had the character injecting themselves with a syringe, and so the power-up was renamed Boot Juice, and the animation was altered worldwide. As always, Censored Gaming will be here to keep you up to date on all further matters relating to this and any other censorship info in the gaming industry. If this is something that you're interested in learning more about, then please make sure to subscribe, and until next time, thank you for watching.